Hogwarts Legacy hasn't been officially revealed yet, but there are increasing signs that we may be getting closer to new information soon. While there are no confirmed announcement or trailers, recent activity around the studio suggests a shift towards a marketing phase that could be starting soon in the coming months. This month, in April of 2026, Avalanche Software hired a new community manager specifically tied to Hogwarts Legacy, a role that typically becomes more active as a project approaches its marketing stage. Cody Wagner publicly introduced himself as a bridge between the studio and the player base, which is one of the clearest signs that development is moving closer to a more public phase and that the project may be shown externally soon. At the same time, it's worth noting that this shift also aligns with internal changes. Chandler Wood, who previously held a similar role as a community manager, has stepped away. I believe it was mentioned that he was getting married and was moving to New York, so it wasn't really in the books, no pun intended, for him to continue working at Avalanche. That makes the transition feel more natural rather than purely strategic, but the timing still suggests that communication around the project may start ramping up. Now, Warner Brothers Discovery has also indicated a broader strategic focus on its biggest franchises. During an earnings call back in February of 2024, CEO JB Parrott emphasized a return to core IPs over the coming years. While Hogwarts Legacy 2 wasn't mentioned directly, the timeline did discuss major releases around the 2027-2028, aligning closely with expectations for a sequel. At the same time, current job listings provide insight into where the development efforts are focused. Avalanche Software is actively hiring roles such as technical artists, character-focused leads, and graphic engineers. These positions point toward improvements in visual fidelity, character animation, and overall world detail. While none of these listings explicitly mention Hogwarts Legacy 2, which is standard practice, of course, they align closely with what you would expect from a sequel of this scale. It likely includes more advanced NPC behavior where characters feel more reactive and less scripted, improved facial animations to avoid the stiffness seen in the first game, and a generally more immersive world where interactions feel more dynamic. It's less about adding entirely new systems and more about elevating the quality and believability of what's already there. And interestingly enough, earlier assumptions about the multiplayer elements now appear less relevant, while old job listings from back in 2025 referenced backend systems like matchmaking and lobbies. These are now believed to be tied to separate online RPG projects rather than Hogwarts Legacy 2 itself. And some people believe that this could point towards a separate multiplayer version of Hogwarts Legacy in some kind of shape or form. And honestly, I think that's a pretty interesting direction, especially when you consider that back when Hogwarts Legacy launched in 2023, there was already a lot of attention around multiplayer mods. It suggests that there's clearly a demand for experiencing the world with others, and given that the game is set in a school environment, it actually makes a lot of sense. It's one of those settings that naturally lends itself to shared experiences. As long as it's handled properly and doesn't interfere with the core design, it could be a genuinely positive addition to the broader franchise. And more recent indications suggest that the sequel itself will focus on a single-player open-world action RPG structure, which is much closer to the original game's core design rather than a shift towards live service or even an MMO-style gameplay. It suggests that Avalanche Software is not attempting to transform the franchise into a platform-driven, continuously monetized experience, but instead building on what made the first game successful, a much more focused, narrative-driven single-player experience within a richly detailed world. However, that does not mean the scope is static. Based on available information, the sequel is expected to expand in several key areas, including a larger and more seamless open world. There could be new regions beyond Hogwarts, enhanced magical systems, and even a wider range of creatures or other possible interactions. One open question is whether Avalanche Software will will explore entirely new locations that haven't been seen in the books, films, or even the Fantastic Beasts series. There's clear opportunity to expand the universe beyond established canon, but that also comes with risk. Alternatively, they could choose to stay within familiar territory, focusing on England and Scotland, where both the Harry Potter and much of the established lore is grounded in. But that decision will likely define how fresh the sequel feels, especially expanding into new regions could make the world feel significantly larger and more ambitious, while staying within known settings could allow for deeper, more detailed world building with a familiar space. Technologically speaking, the game is being developed using the Unreal 5 engine alongside tools such as Maya, and where the Unreal Engine 5 handles rendering, lighting, and large-scale world building. Maya is typically used for creating and animating 3D assets, especially characters, creatures, and complex animations in general. And that combination supports the expansion of a more advanced and visually refined experience, particularly when it comes to character realism and animation quality. Improvements in lighting, environmental detail, and character presentation are therefore likely to be central to the sequel's overall feel. Another important shift lies in how the post-launch content is being approached. Avalanche has reportedly and very clearly moved away from releasing major DLC for the original game. Instead, they are relocating resources towards the sequel, and this suggests a more long-term approach where expansions are or additional content may be integrated to Hogwarts Legacy 2's lifestyle rather than extending the first game any further. Despite these developments, there are still significant unknowns. There has been no official announcement, no confirmed title, no trailer, or no gameplay reveal. The story direction, setting, and character continuity remain entirely undisclosed as well. At the same time, the original Hogwarts Legacy continues to receive support in 2025 and even in 2026, including platform expansions into the Nintendo ecosystem with the launch of the Nintendo Switch 2, meaning the studio is effectively operating on two fronts. One of the more interesting unknowns is how they will approach its main character. It's unclear whether the game will continue with a character similar to the one in the first title, or if they are going to introduce a completely new protagonist or take a different approach altogether. There's also the question of where that character sits within the Hogwarts timeline, whether they are still a student, perhaps continuing from a later year beyond the fifth year starting point of the original game, or if the game shifts perspectives from the student experience. Personally, I think it seems more likely that a sequel will stay within the student grounds, but move toward a character in the later years at Hogwarts. That would allow the game to build on the established structure while naturally expanding complexity both narratively and also mechanically. Especially moving away from the school setting entirely would be a much bigger shift, and while not totally impossible and out of this world, it would risk losing one of the core elements that define the first game's identity. But from a broader perspective, Hogwarts Legacy 2 represents a relatively low risk but a high stakes project for Warner Brothers. The first game's massive commercial success ensures a strong foundation, but it also raises expectations significantly. The key challenge will not be whether the sequel can succeed, but whether it can evolve meaningfully without losing the elements that made the original resonate with players. And that ultimately comes down to the balance that Avalanche Software end up with, because the sequel needs to introduce enough new ideas to feel like a genuine step forward while still retaining the familiarity that players connected with in the first place. If it leans too heavily on what already worked, it risks feeling repetitive, but if it changes too much, it risks losing the identity that made the original successful. And finding that middle ground between innovation and familiarity is likely to be one of the most important decisions shaping the sequel. And in that sense, the current development signals point towards a continuation rather than a totally new reinvention. The focus appears to be on refinement, expansion, technical improvement, rather than a fundamental shift in design philosophy. We've seen such games before, for example, with Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, where the first game was, let's just say, flawed in some areas. It was lacking in a lot of the combat and in general world building, where the sequel Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 were heavily refining these flawed areas and building upon it, and actually managed to release a solid game that was praised within both the community but also in the wider gaming industry. And in terms of Hogwarts Legacy, whether that will be enough in a market where player expectations continue to rise remains an open question. But I'm hopeful that they could manage to pull through with all these systems that was lacking in the original one, especially the traversal. I feel like some of the controls could do with a bit of a touch up. I felt that they weren't really that intuitive, and especially how you traverse the open world on a broom. I know that kind of traversal became kind of redundant later on when you got some mounts and stuff like that, but I feel like they could introduce some new mechanics in those areas to make it feel more easy to traverse rather than relying on the fast travel options. But anyway, that's going to do it for me. I hope you enjoyed this video. I am definitely looking forward to covering Hogwarts Legacy 2 when it eventually is revealed, especially when the release date comes up. I'm hoping we get to see it soon. I'm hoping we get to see what kinds of improvements are made to the game. And yeah, I hope you enjoy this video. Take care, everyone.